There are moments in life that don't just pass by, they linger, twisting in the shadows of your mind, impossible to forget. Those moments when the line between reality and nightmare blurs become a part of you. This is one of those moments, one that has haunted me for years, leaving behind scars that never quite heal. I was in my early 20s, living in a small town just outside of Manchester, New Hampshire. At that point in my life, everything felt hollow, like I was drifting aimlessly. I had just ended a 2-year relationship, the kind of breakup that leaves you with a void you can't quite fill. I spent my days moving through the motions, trying to find some kind of meaning, some way to piece myself back together. My grandmother, a devout woman with a faith as strong as iron, was the only constant in my life during that time. I had lost my grandfather recently, an old war hero who had been the pillar of our family, and with him, my grandmother seemed to crumble into her faith even more. She spent hours praying, attending church every Sunday without fail. I didn't share her devotion, but I would go with her, more out of obligation than belief, a way to keep her company and try to make sense of the mess that was my life. And then there was her. It was just another Sunday when I first saw her. The church, with its tall, cold stone walls and stained glass windows that let in the sunlight in slivers, felt like a place suspended in time. The pews were filled with familiar faces, all lost in prayer or routine. But there, sitting in the farthest pew, was a woman I'd never seen before. She was captivating. Something about her presence seemed out of place, almost unnatural for such a small town. Her dark, curly hair framed her face like a cloud, and her hazel eyes shimmered with an unsettling intensity. They were eyes that seemed to know things, secrets, truths, that no one should ever know. After the service, I couldn't help myself. I had to approach her. She turned toward me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, but still carried an undeniable warmth. "I'm Kaylee," she said, her voice soft and melodious, like it carried some strange weight to it. We talked for a while, my curiosity growing with each word. There was an aura about her, something mysterious, almost otherworldly. She avoided my questions about her past, making light of them with a playful laugh, teasing that I'd have to take her out on a date if I wanted those answers. I laughed nervously, not knowing whether she was serious or just toying with me. By the end of the conversation, I had her number, her phone number, which felt like a small victory in a life that had been slipping through my fingers. The days that followed were filled with texts, mostly harmless at first, but each message from her felt like a breadcrumb, leading me deeper into her world. She told me her family had just moved to town, and that she was attending a nearby college. But something felt off about her stories. It wasn't that she was lying, but rather she was holding back. There was a darkness to her that I couldn't shake, even though I didn't understand it. That next Sunday she was at church again. This time I didn't hesitate. I asked her out. She agreed with little more than a flicker of a smile, her gaze never leaving mine, as if she could see straight through me. The days before our date dragged on, each one heavier than the last. When the night finally came, I was eager, nervous, and a little excited. We went to a movie, then grabbed dinner. A simple night, nothing fancy, but everything about it felt different when she was around. Her presence filled the air like a thick fog. The conversation flowed easily, but she remained an enigma. I found myself drawn to her in ways I couldn't explain, sharing parts of myself I hadn't let anyone see in years. After dinner, I suggested a drive, wanting to prolong our time together. She agreed, and we left the city behind, heading out into the wilderness. The night was pitch black, the only light coming from my car's headlights, cutting through the dense woods on either side of the road. The silence in the car was comfortable at first, but soon it became unsettling. It started with a whisper, a murmur from her lips that I couldn't quite make out. At first I thought it was nothing. Maybe she was humming to herself or talking in her sleep. But then I heard words, words that didn't make sense. Her voice was low, guttural, and the language sounded like something ancient, something that shouldn't be spoken by a person. It wasn't French, but there were traces of it, twisted, jagged fragments of something older. I looked over at her confused, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. Her eyes, those piercing hazel eyes, were rolled back, leaving only the whites visible. The shock hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't joking. She wasn't messing with me. This wasn't some prank. It was something far darker. Panic surged through me. I swerved the car, nearly hitting the guardrail as I pulled over to the side of the road. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone. I called for help, my voice shaking as I tried to explain the situation. But all the while, Kaylee, no, whatever was inside her, kept muttering those unintelligible words, her body jerking, shaking violently. It was like she was possessed, her movements erratic and unnatural, as if she were no longer in control of herself. I was frozen, trapped in the car, unable to help her. I wanted to act, to do something, anything, but fear held me in place, paralyzed. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Kaylee's head snapped toward me, her eyes locking onto mine. Her pupils were normal again, but the look she gave me wasn't. It was predatory, wild, and filled with unfathomable malice. The warmth that had once radiated from her was gone, replaced by something far colder. Before I could say anything, she flung the car door open and sprinted into the woods. There was no hesitation, no stumble. She ran with a speed that was unnatural, too fast for any normal human to move. Within seconds, she vanished into the darkness, swallowed by the forest like she was never there at all. I sat there in stunned silence, my heart still racing, unsure if I was even awake. When the paramedics and police arrived, I told them everything. The chanting, the eyes, her sudden flight into the woods. They looked at me like I was crazy. They took my statement, of course, but there was no sign of her. No trace. She was gone. Her phone number? Gone. Her Instagram? Deleted. No one at church had ever heard of her. It was as if she had never existed at all. Years have passed since that night, but I can still feel the chill of her gaze, the haunting memory of those eyes locked onto mine, and the echo of her words still lingering in my mind. I left New Hampshire behind, but the terror hasn't left me. Some nights, when I'm alone and the world is quiet, I hear whispers, faint and distant, like the wind carrying words I can't understand. But I know they're not just the wind. I know it's her voice, calling out from the darkness, waiting, watching. And I can't help but wonder, what does she want and why does it feel like she's still out there, somewhere? The old Volvo sat at the edge of the cracked Nevada highway, its frame groaning under the weight of years and neglect. A relic from 2012, it should have been nothing more than a rusted memory by now. Yet there it was, still running, still crawling along the barren desert roads, like a twisted reminder of something that should have been forgotten. The engine choked and sputtered as if it was fighting its own demise, and the brakes. They were like stepping on air, offering no resistance. It was a car that had no right to be alive. But somehow, it still was. The windshield wipers, long abandoned in their futile struggle, were useless against the downpour. The rain lashed against the glass, turning the world outside into an indistinct blur of water and shadows. The car was more than a machine now. It was a curse. And I, the unfortunate driver, was bound to it. I had been driving for hours, my thoughts drifting like the road itself. The trip had started so innocently. A road trip with Kelvin, an old friend, to catch up. Days spent laughing and drinking in another state, living in a carefree bubble. But the return trip, that's when everything changed. That's when the nightmare began. The storm came out of nowhere. The rain didn't simply fall. It smashed against the windshield, as though the heavens themselves were trying to break through. The sky split open with jagged lightning that illuminated the desert in terrifying, fleeting flashes. The world outside was swallowed up in the storm's fury, and inside the car, my heart raced as I gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. The wipers were dead. The storm was relentless. And the Volvo, cursed as it was, seemed to be doing everything it could to betray me. I could feel my panic rising. Desperate to escape the worst of the storm, I pulled the car over, the tires grinding against the gravel as I steered it off the highway. The desert stretched around me, an infinite sea of emptiness, illuminated only by the occasional flash of lightning. There were no other cars, no sign of life anywhere. Just me. Alone, in the middle of nowhere, with the storm pressing in from all sides. I thought of calling for help, but I knew it was pointless. No one would be able to reach me. The thought of explaining my situation over a crackling phone line to some disinterested officer felt more absurd with each passing second. The money in my wallet was almost gone. A ticket for a car barely clinging to life wasn't something I needed to add to the already growing list of worries. So I sat there in the Volvo, surrounded by the storm, waiting for the rain to subside. An hour passed, maybe two. It was hard to tell. The only sound in the world was the endless drumming of the rain on the roof, a maddening metronome that seemed to sync with the rising anxiety in my chest. The desert was alive with noise now, the wind howling, the storm crashing against the earth like some ancient battle. But despite it all, a suffocating silence hung over me, pressing down on my mind, warping my thoughts. It started with a feeling, a cold, unshakable sensation that crawled up my spine like icy fingers, whispering to me that something was wrong. A sense of unease bloomed in the pit of my stomach. Something was out there, in the storm, watching me. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself it was just the isolation, just the storm playing tricks on my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling. My eyes darted to the windows, scanning the endless desert outside. I saw nothing. No movement. Just darkness and rain, swirling together in a chaotic symphony. But the feeling didn't go away. The sun had disappeared long ago, and twilight settled over the desert like a heavy, oppressive blanket. It was then that the desert became something else. It was no longer just an empty wasteland, it became a trap, a pit, and I was the rat stuck in the center of it. That's when I saw them. A flicker, a flash. At first I thought it was just another lightning strike, but there was something different about it. These lights weren't fleeting. They were erratic, sharp bursts of white that moved, bounced, closing in on me with each passing moment. My stomach tightened, a lump forming in my throat. The flashlights, 3 of them, danced in the distance, their beams cutting through the rain like wild animals hunting in the dark. They moved in strange, jerky patterns, their glow painting the desert in unnatural strokes. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I was not alone. There were people out there. But who? And why were they coming toward me? My mind raced. Instinct told me to hide. I couldn't wait to find out who they were or what they wanted. I slid out of the car, the rain immediately soaking me to the bone, and scrambled toward the nearest rock formation. The cold stone felt like a strange comfort against my back as I crouched low, breathing in shallow, panicked gasps. Through the rain-soaked haze, I watched as the figures neared my car. They were all dressed in dark clothing, their movements erratic, their lights flicking around in patterns that made no sense. It was as though they were circling the car, like predators sizing up their prey. My body shook with fear, my thoughts racing as I tried to make sense of the situation. The figures grew closer, their flashlights piercing the storm, cutting through the dark like knives. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't notice me. Then one of them raised a hand and fired a shot into the air. The crack of the gunshot echoed across the empty desert like a thunderclap. It felt as though the earth itself trembled beneath me. I bit my lip, tasting blood, forcing myself to stay silent, to remain as still as possible. My body was frozen, paralyzed with terror. I had no idea what was happening, or who these people were, but I knew deep down that I wasn't safe. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I could hear the rain, the wind, and the relentless beating of my own heart, but nothing else. The world outside had become a void, a pit of darkness where anything could happen. And then, just as quickly as they had come, the flashlights vanished. The silence that followed was suffocating. The storm still raged, but the chaos had stopped. I could hear nothing but my own heartbeat. I waited. I waited in that darkness, the fear creeping into my bones like cold, uninvited shadows. I wasn't sure what to do. Was it safe to leave the rock formation? Should I get back in the car and drive? I couldn't even see the car anymore through the rain, and the thought of being caught out in the open was unbearable. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed 911. My voice cracked as I whispered into the phone, barely able to form coherent words. The operator's voice sounded far away, distant. She assured me help was on the way, but her words felt hollow, as though they were floating through a fog. And then, just like before, the flashlights reappeared. They flickered to life again, darting around the desert, moving in erratic patterns, taunting me with their impossible unpredictability. The figures had returned, circling once more. They moved with purpose, but there was no rhythm to their movement, no rhyme to their steps. They were toying with me. I was their plaything. But just as the dread reached its peak, a distant light appeared, cutting through the rain. The red and blue of a police siren flashed, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. The figures froze, their heads snapping toward the approaching car. Then, like shadows, they melted into the storm, disappearing without a trace. I ran toward the patrol car, my legs nearly giving out beneath me as I waved my arms frantically. The officer stepped out of the car, his face grim but filled with a weary concern. I poured out my story to him, desperate to make him understand. But he didn't seem shocked. In fact, he didn't seem surprised at all. He listened, nodded, and stayed with me through the storm, his presence a frail shield against the lingering terror. The figures were gone, but the questions remained. Who were they? What did they want with me? And why did they vanish so quickly? I'll never know. That night, as I drove away with the officer, I tried to shake the feeling of being watched. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just a bad dream, a trick of the storm, but the terror lingered, like an invisible weight pressing against my chest. Now, whenever I'm forced to drive through the open desert, my heart races. The vast, empty stretches of land are no longer peaceful. They're a reminder that something or someone might still be waiting out there just beyond the horizon, and I'll never know if they'll come for me again. The desert is vast. It is endless. And somewhere out there in the heart of the storm, they might still be waiting, watching, and I'll never be able to forget the flashlights, the figures, the storm that seemed like it would never end. It was supposed to be a road trip, just a simple, fun journey from Florida to New Jersey. My name is Mary, and this strange, unsettling experience is something I'll never forget. Carol and I had just visited some friends down south, and the drive back was meant to be a casual one, snacks, music, and hours of catching up. But there's a point when things shift, when a little detour can send you into something far darker than you could ever imagine. We should have stayed one more night with our friends, but I was eager to get home. So we decided to push through the night, driving until the sun began to rise. But as the first light of day peeked over the horizon, a sharp pain in my back pulled me from the haze of exhaustion. My body screamed for relief from hours of constant driving. I suggested we stop at the next town, grab some gas, stretch our legs, maybe find a snack before heading back on the road. Carol reluctantly agreed, and we continued searching for a place to pull over. After passing a few exits, we finally took one to a small town that, according to the signs, was bustling with tourists and local attractions. But as soon as we rolled into town, a strange unease settled over me. The streets were empty, eerily so. It looked like a ghost town, but not quite. Something was off. The buildings seemed worn down, as though they'd seen better days. There were signs advertising shops and attractions, yet there was no one around. It was a place that should have been full of life, but instead it felt dead. It wasn't the usual kind of spooky you'd expect from an abandoned town. No, this was different. It was like it was stuck in time. We didn't think much of it, though, just a small, odd town. We pulled into a convenience store to grab some drinks. I noticed the cashier was a woman, tall, around 30 or 35, with dark brown hair and suspenders. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but that detail stuck with me. The store felt normal enough. Carol was looking for a specific drink, but when they didn't have it, she threw a mini tantrum. I indulged her, offering to go to another store across the street. When we walked in, something made my stomach drop. The cashier behind the counter looked exactly like the woman from the first store. Same height, same hair, same face, same everything. I froze. My mind struggled to grasp what I was seeing. I stared at her, making her uncomfortable. The déjà vu hit me like a punch to the gut. I asked her if she had a twin or maybe a sister, but her response sent a chill down my spine. She said she didn't have a twin, that she was an only child, and that it was a strange question to ask. Her tone was sharp, almost defensive. I tried to explain myself, but she only stared back at me with suspicion. I backed out of the store, pulling Carol with me. I wanted to make sense of it. "Did you notice anything weird?" I asked. Carol, oblivious, didn't remember what the first cashier looked like. She said I was probably just tired, that it was nothing. But I knew what I'd seen. I was determined to prove it, so we ran back to the first convenience store. But when we walked in, the woman behind the counter was completely different. She was shorter, with light hair, and looked older, definitely not the woman I had seen earlier. There was no way she could have been the same person. It was like the first cashier had never existed at all. I was left confused, unsettled, but Carol brushed it off. "You're just tired," she said. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. We needed gas, so we pulled into the nearest station. It was empty, just the two of us, a lonely building and the gas pumps. We walked inside, and I couldn't help but feel this creeping sense of dread, like something was watching us. Carol took her time looking for a drink, but I paid and we left quickly. That's when the impossible happened. The gas station, which had been completely empty just moments ago, was now teeming with people. Cars were lined up at every pump, and the parking lot was full. But here's the thing, it was impossible. There hadn't been a single soul there when we walked in. No cars, no people, just us. But now, the place was packed. The worst part, it was like everyone was staring at us. Not just glancing, staring. I felt a cold sweat break out, a panic rising in my chest. Carol felt it too. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I could feel the weight of 100 eyes boring into us. We rushed to the car, trying to ignore the overwhelming unease. But the moment we pulled out of the station, it was as if the whole town was watching. We were not supposed to be there. We didn't talk much after that. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had crossed some invisible line. Something had shifted. Reality felt wrong. We got back on the highway, both of us silent, lost in our own thoughts. And then, just as we were beginning to feel a little more at ease, it happened again. A car, a Toyota Sienna, passed us. It was hard to miss. The windshield had a massive crack running through it, like a spider web, and the side was badly scratched. Carol made some comment about it, laughing lightly to ease the tension, but I couldn't forget that cracked windshield. And then, just minutes later, it happened again. The same damn car. I couldn't believe it. There was no way it could have gotten ahead of us. We had been driving at a fast clip. The odds of seeing the exact same car with the same exact crack were impossible. Carol was panicking now. She was on the edge, hyperventilating, telling me to speed up. And I did. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. Then, as if everything wasn't weird enough, I checked the GPS. An hour had passed, but it couldn't have. We hadn't stopped. Time didn't make sense anymore. The whole trip felt warped. We finally made it back onto the main highway, and that's when the strangest part hit me. The feeling, that horrible feeling in my gut. It didn't leave me. It still hasn't. It's like my body was telling me something I couldn't explain. Something was wrong. I knew something was wrong. By the time we got home, it felt like waking up from a dream. Disjointed, surreal. My mind still struggles to piece it all together. I've tried researching what happened that day, and I've found stories that are strangely similar, but I'll never forget the feeling I had. The gut-wrenching certainty that something wasn't right. People who hear this story look at me like I'm crazy, but I know what I felt. I know what happened. I'll never go back to that place, and I'll never ignore the way my body knew something was wrong, even when I couldn't see it. I don't know what happened in that town. I don't know if we slipped into another dimension, or if the laws of reality just bent. But whatever it was, I don't want to go back to find out.